78 hours of work per week. That was the exhausting life of an ordinary worker, until, without warning, he suddenly woke up in a different world. Now, he is the crown prince, surrounded by luxury, endless food, and girls attending to his every need. A dream come true, if not for one detail. He has lived this story before, on his phone screen. He knows that in exactly 10 years, this kingdom will fall, and he will be defeated by the villains, but he refuses to accept that fate. To survive, he decides to play dirty and become the greatest manipulative villain this world has ever seen. 10 years in the future, Earth was devastated by the 5 sins. To prevent this ruin, he became a sponsor to 5 seemingly powerful young prodigies. He never imagined it would become something so massive. He was just an exhausted salaryman, working 78 hours a week for a small firm, who got reborn as a noble in a fantasy world. At the time, it seemed like a pretty good deal. He's holding a book upside down, wondering what it says. You're the butler, telling him the book is upside down. To top it all off, his character stats show he's completely illiterate with 0 special skills. But he is the son of a count. He does nothing but eat and play all day long. He is incredibly spoiled. The moment he finishes a meal, he gets waited on hand and foot. Someone mentions that since the other young masters are returning tomorrow, for him, it's like 2016. He wonders, which young masters? She answers that it's Leo and Tony. She remarks that he speaks as if he's never heard of the Pilato family. Inside his head, looking thoughtful, he realizes that name is frighteningly familiar. Terrified, he dunks his head in water and wonders if this is psychedelia. Back when he was overworked, carving out tiny bits of free time, psychedelia was the RPG he played. It didn't matter which route you chose. The moment the 5 great sins appeared, wrath, greed, sloth, pride, and obsession, the kingdom, everything began a downward spiral, and right in the middle of it was the Palatio County. They are a family of noble swindlers who appear in a side quest before the main plot even kicks in. Searching his memories, he realizes he actually knows this place. This county deals in serious illegal businesses and runs an organization called Avalon. Disbelieving, the protagonist looks around and realizes, of all places, he ended up in the very first family in the kingdom slated for annihilation. Lying in bed, he says he'd rather be an exhausted salaryman working 78 hours a week again. He begs to be sent back. He argues there's no point in having a stylish, luxurious life if he's just going to meet his end in 10 years. He says this while crying on his bed, clutching a pillow in desperation. He says this is even worse than that time his salary was withheld for 6 months. He wonders how he can be a transmigrator with absolutely no special advantages. He grumbles that protagonists in other stories get all kinds of cheat skills. He gets out of bed and realizes, wait, he did get a special advantage. Knowing the game's events 10 years from now is the same as knowing the actual future. So, Alon just needs to eliminate the causes of destruction preemptively. To guarantee a peaceful life as a noble, the protagonist decides to reform the 5 great sins. He figures that since they are still just children right now, it should be possible. 2 months later, in his office, the protagonist receives news. The orphans have been rescued from the Eastern Orphanage, or rather, that severe confinement facility. Upon hearing this, the protagonist notes his judgment was correct and calls his personal knight very capable. The knight asks if that's genuinely a compliment, noting that his master's expression never changes. The protagonist insists he's counting on Evan and forces a very strange, awkward smile. Thinking about expressions, Alan remarks that his old face was very expressive. He stares into the mirror, trying to smile. He says it feels like his soul hasn't quite adapted to these new facial muscles yet. Evan says that regardless, he appreciates the compliment. The protagonist notes that, in a game like Psychedelia, where betrayal is the norm, Evan is that rare gem of a supporting character who remains loyal to the very end. He hired him the second he found him. The knight says that even after many long years as a mercenary, that girl was anything but ordinary. When he went to rescue the children, he saw Yutia trapped in a cell, suffering. He remarks that she was so powerful, he couldn't understand why she remained obedient and imprisoned. He asks why the master won't bring her here, as there is nothing to gain by leaving her there. The protagonist explains that it might seem like he's wasting her power, but leaving her right where she is also part of his plan. Yutia is from the different blood clan, those who wield the power of otherworldly beings. She is destined to become the sin of wrath, one of the 5 great sins. She becomes a creature that causes mass casualties. But if she grows up in a peaceful environment, she won't join the side of ruin. He says this, confident in his plan. He says he's finally taken care of the first threat. The reason he left her there was to evaluate her superficially. With a serious face, the protagonist responds to Evan, saying it's not the right time yet. He tells Evan to ensure nothing about what happened leaks out, and to guarantee they receive generous support. He also sent a letter to be delivered to the girl. Evan asks if the content is important. Alon answers that it's just a greeting letter. He thought it would be best to calm her down after her terrible experience in that place. His knight promises to deliver it safely, mounting his horse and riding off directly to deliver the missive. Watching his knight depart, Alon admits to himself that he doesn't know if it will actually calm her down, but for now, he at least has to keep trying. The true hidden message in that letter was an explanation he had heard dozens of times during his repeated playthroughs. It was a key phrase that appears during the storyline of the Sin of Wrath. In the game, that is the precise moment where the Archbishop fails with his words and a confrontation begins. But now, 10 years in the past, it might not be too late, since she is still just a young girl. Stretching, he says that now that he's dealt with one of the 5 causes of destruction, he wonders who is next. He admits that making friends with the girl using a single phrase seems ridiculous, but since their clan worships things from other worlds, it just might work. He notes that the minds of those inhabiting the realm of fanaticism are difficult to comprehend. He adds that her intense energy is absurd, and she is a strange child, apparently devoid of emotion. Evan arrived to deliver the letter to the girl. She asks if Lord Allen sent it. Then, with an intense expression and power pouring off her, she demands to know why he didn't call her to his side. The knight became apprehensive, wondering just what that aura around her was. He realizes that visualizing such energy is only possible for those who have reached master level. He remembers his protagonist master saying it wasn't the right time yet. Trying to calm Utia down, he tells her Alon said the time hasn't come yet. At the end of the letter is written the word likely to secure their friendship. Upon reading it, Utia clutches the letter to her heart, calming down. She says this is certainly a promise only her master would know. She says she understands, more or less. The testament, she says, smiling and much calmer now. Meanwhile, Alan was lying in bed, a bit tired, thinking it had been a gratifying day of prolonging his comfortable life. He remarks that even the bright moon seems to be rooting for him, and says he'll have to work hard on the next target. Sitting up in bed, holding a blue flower, a tip for transmigrators suddenly appears. It states that the Kingdom of Asteria has a funeral tradition of placing blue moon flowers on the deceased, particularly those associated with the cause of the kingdom's end. After reading this, he bursts into tears, wailing that he just wanted to live a long, healthy, and pleasant life. The protagonist was in the library, searching for any clue that might lead him to the third sin. His knight approached and reported that they had successfully rescued the second child he had mentioned. Exhausted from poring over books and wearing a lackluster expression, he asked his knight if the child had been treated well. Extremely well. The knight confirmed that naturally they were treated well after being rescued from that terrible place they were kept in. As they conversed, the Count's second son, Tonio, arrived. He immediately started mocking the protagonist for holding a book when he supposedly knew nothing. He sneered that he'd heard the protagonist was finally learning to read lately. Then, dropping the jokes, Tonio glared furiously at the protagonist and demanded an answer, reminding him that he was his older brother. Alon thought to himself that Tonio was always difficult. He wondered how the original Alon ever managed to deal with him. He would have loved to retort. Instead, from his spot on the floor, the protagonist told his older brother he could have the office and that he was leaving. Glaring with contempt, Tonio remarked that it was good he knew his place. Suddenly, an object flew across the room and smashed against the wall. It was Leo, complaining that they were making too much noise. He declared he didn't want to see any strangers right now and ordered both of them out of the office. The two older brothers faced off, exchanging heated words, while the protagonist remained crouched down, confused by the turn of events. In the original game, the Palladio family were mere side characters who disappeared almost instantly, but their actual power was far greater than he had imagined. These were the notorious brothers fighting for control of the family. They were powerful figures controlling shady businesses throughout the city. That meant if the protagonist wanted to live a comfortable life, he must never provoke them. He sneaked away, slipping out quietly alongside his knight. He declared his intention to live a peaceful life far from trouble. Watching Alon lean back on the sofa, Evan wondered to himself, how could someone like him unravel complex secrets and navigate dangerous situations just to save children? Evan asked why he chose these specific cases, noting that Alan seemed to barely be able to take care of himself. The protagonist reminded Evan that he had said the child wasn't exactly ordinary. Alan insisted the child was more than ordinary. She was a force that would change everything. The child had been rescued from dire circumstances in the Caliano kingdom. After facing immense hardships and being bounced around, That child would eventually become the sin of sloth among the Great Five. He would ultimately cause a massive impact on the kingdom, bringing complete chaos to the region. It was the part of the game that surprised players the most with its intensity. Contrary to the title, the Sin of Sloth was a diligent force that responded to any challenge tenfold. That was why Alon reminded Evan to treat the child extremely well. Responding again, his knight explained that the reason Alon sent the child to a safe location was simply because the timing wasn't right yet. The knight then wondered if that was what the letter sent to Yutia about the second son was regarding. The protagonist claimed it was just friendly, daily conversation. He had told her he was sending a child who needed attention and asked her to take good care of him. Yutia looked at the child and remarked that he had been through a lot, wondering aloud if it was truly the work of the Black Goat. She congratulated him, saying the Great Moon had chosen someone like him. With open hands, emanating power, she told him to feel the power granted to him and unleash what was his. She promised that if he dedicated himself solely to serving her, he could achieve his goals. She took the letter sent by Alon, pointed it toward the moon, and began to read what he had written about the child he sent. She decided she should send her first reply. Meanwhile, the protagonist was back in the library, surrounded by piles of books and looking exhausted. His knight burst through the doors with force. Worriedly asking where the third son was, he announced there was a major problem. His knight informed him that the second brother had passed away. At the wake, the count had two young women around him offering comfort. It seemed, however, that the count didn't care at all about what had happened. He asked when it would end, complaining that he was bored, wearing an expression of total indifference to the gravity of the moment. The protagonist thought the count arriving at his own son's funeral in such a pathetic state, and with company, was absurd. He knew the count was problematic, but this was a whole new level of questionable behavior. Still, for Tonio to die so soon, the details were slightly different than he remembered. In the game, he was sure he had struggled to defeat him. Now, however, he wore a surprised expression. Watching the count smile, Alan concluded the responsible party must be Leo, or someone connected to him. Regardless, he only needed to deal with the 5 great sins. He didn't need to worry about this family drama. A year later, with the succession settled and Leo in charge of the family business, the house had become much more peaceful. During that time, he and Yutia had become pen pals. He figured building this relationship gradually would certainly prove useful later. She reported that everyone was growing up wonderfully without any issues. Reading the letter, pleased with the news, the protagonist remarked that they seemed like very good children. She provided the list of sponsors. The protagonist wondered why the sponsor list was growing. He noted how strange it was that a major opponent kept securing more support. The knight reported that he had obtained information from the guild. They found a clue regarding something Alon had been actively searching for. The protagonist responded with relief. In his head, he thought this clue must be about the third boss. He celebrated internally, thinking he had finally managed to find that guy. At the operations center, 2 men grabbed something and commented that the eldest son was very generous, noting the rewards were always incredible. They boasted that their organization had grown considerably and now had many members. As they left the premises, they stumbled upon several people neutralized on the floor. Someone had overpowered them. Confused, the 2 men suddenly found their own actions being controlled, and they were quickly restrained. Just like that, everyone was neutralized. Yutia remarked that she also enjoyed the demonstration that had just occurred. It revealed a way to control people's actions without their knowledge. Macallion asked if these actions held any significance. Yutia replied by asking if he felt pity for them. The boy answered no. They were bad people who did terrible things to maintain their businesses. He simply didn't see it that way and would help with her plans. She agreed, stating that this was merely the cornerstone laid as the foundation for his return. She added that when he arrived, it would be fitting for his house to face major problems. She declared that everything was proceeding according to her will. Their blue moon was her tool. And just like that, the city was facing chaos once again. 2 years have passed since the protagonist began exchanging letters with Yutia. His knight, looking a bit weary, was searching for him. He spotted him in the yard. Upon arriving, the knight just lay down on the ground, startling the protagonist. Lying on the ground, Evan gave a thumbs up. He announced that the 5th one had been safely sent to the orphanage. Hands covering his mouth in surprise, the protagonist was overjoyed. During this time, he had also managed to rescue the remaining 3 sins. Finding the 3rd sin, greed, had been a bit tougher. Thanks to his game knowledge, he made Evan gamble a lot, and everything worked out. The protagonist held a tray of cookies. When the knight saw it, he immediately jumped up and grabbed some to eat. He told Evan he did well running all over the place and could rest now. Evan wondered if the orphanage missions were over. Relieved, the protagonist said yes. The missions to find the kids were done. Evan asked if the protagonist wasn't happy, noting he wasn't showing any emotion. With half-closed eyes and a sad-looking face, The protagonist pointed to his mouth. He said he was smiling, slightly. Lying on the backyard lawn, the protagonist said everything went well. Better than he expected. He managed to get all the sins of psychedelia. They were all destined to become the 5 great sins due to tragic pasts. Even though this world is set in their past, before they awakened as sins, the chances of saving them perfectly before those events were low. He had been worried he might only save them after they were already ruined. The protagonist asked his knight to go deliver a letter. Evan said things were the same as always, running perfectly. The children, who were like broken dolls at first, had improved significantly. The protagonist asked if he was serious, adding that they didn't need a caretaker. He wouldn't have thought Yutia would do such a good job. Maybe it's because her background is linked to an orphanage, he wondered. Seen that way, she is also a good girl. Curious, his knight asked if there was anything special in the letter. Happy, the protagonist said it was good to see all the orphanage children growing up properly. In his mind, he noted that all 5 sins were growing, so he reckoned the environment really makes a difference. The knight asked when exactly he planned to meet these kids. He noted the protagonist always said he'd see them when the time was right. The protagonist honestly said he never planned to meet them in person. Getting close to them would be useful, but the process of them becoming sins was horrific. Even from game flashbacks, their personalities were extreme from childhood. The protagonist saved them before they awakened, so it's probably better, but it's still very scary. Answering the knight, he said maybe 5 years later would be right. All he needed to do was develop enough self-defense skills to survive in this dark fantasy world. He said this while practicing a type of magic, sitting in his yard. Magic requires talent. And guess what? His body has plenty of it. Evan asked if the protagonist had heard of Blue Moon. The protagonist never had. It's a newly famous organization that hunts criminals. He said they seem to be doing good work. Again, he didn't remember this from the game. It must be a short-term event. Scared and alarmed, Evan said it seems this group also confronts nobles. That's why he thought the protagonist would have heard of them. Fearful, he said from now on, every night his knight would sleep in his room right next to him. Yutia announced that everyone would now hear the Blue Moon activity report for the week. She asked about the North. A small boy said he already took care of everything. He responded, the sin of pride. He said they didn't even figure out who he was. He mentioned the outfit Rhine made was amazing, and no one knew his eye color. A girl said she dealt with the opponents completely. Sitting on some stairs, a boy noted the juice ran out too. The illegal activity site and those annoying guys from Avalon were defeated, leaving no trace. Ladan said this with an intense smile. Yutia, happy with all the reports, said everything was proceeding according to her will. She said they exist for the Great Moon, the secret organization Blue Moon, worshippers of the Great Moon. However, she noted there was a problem. Under her will, everything should be perfect. How could there be a problem, she wondered. She mentioned the leader of Avalon is the Count's oldest son. During the Southern cleanup, they found a dangerous directive. It seems the old Count is plotting against him. She was surprised, but said it was true. She saw a letter indicating this. After the old Count's death. Angrily, she crumpled the letter paper. She said he was definitely right. 2 years later, the Count passed away, and the protagonist is at his wake. The official cause was a heart attack, but given his poor health due to his habits before death, it was expected. The eldest son asked if it was Blue Moon again. The guard said yes. They ambushed again the previous night, wondering if it was another major confrontation. In his head, the protagonist noted, it seems even they are taking Blue Moon more seriously now, and so, the Count's funeral, without a single mourner, ended silently. Evan asked what the protagonist would do now. The knight said next year, the eldest, meaning the first young master, would become the new head. Then, he wondered why the protagonist was packing his bags. The protagonist told his knight to pack his things too. He said they were leaving. Confused, the knight wondered if he was leaving the territory. The protagonist said he wasn't leaving completely, just heading south. Evan asked if they were going to the lower south, meaning Road Mill. The protagonist confirmed yes. He planned to depart for the small southern village. Heading to their carriage, the two headed south. The new Count, from the window balcony, watched the two departing for the southern village. 3 days later, the protagonist and his knight were having a beautiful breakfast. Breads, eggs, juices. The two were very happy. They returned to the Count's estate. The man ended up wondering, and the protagonist thought that this time, it's the eldest son's funeral. He couldn't believe he had returned to this place. He noted his death, and the scene were completely different, wondering why he died so soon. Cause of death. A fatal attack. He wondered who attacked the Count. The protagonist looked at a guard and asked about the cause of death. Fearful, the guards apologized for making eye contact. He asked what happened to him all of a sudden. Together with his knight, the protagonist asked if he discovered anything. He replied yes, and asked if it was him who defeated Avalon overnight. Sometime later, on the day he left alone for Road Mill, His knight wondered if the protagonist was leaving anyway. He asked if it wouldn't be better to go to a bigger city like New Orleans. Insolent, he replied absolutely not, saying that city is the final destination of his plan. He saved the 5 sins from their disgrace. He prevented the future where the world is destroyed. Roadmill has no connection to the original story. It even has Palatio Village. He said, when you live as a lazy noble your whole life, it's the perfect place to live comfortably. He answers his knight, claiming there's a good reason for everything. The knight insists he won't fall for that again. He knows the protagonist always pushes things aside whenever he gets annoyed. Out of options, the protagonist suggests they just drop it. Wearing an awkward look, he realizes just how perceptive the knight really is. As they headed toward the city, the Count watched from his balcony, debating whether to neutralize the protagonist. He figured the guy was useless regardless of his presence. After the father's death, he had considered dealing with him to manage the situation. But since the protagonist agreed to go quietly to the frontier, there was no longer any reason to pursue him. He found himself wondering why things lately weren't going well in Avalon. Suspicious, he ordered a servant to follow their wagon discreetly. The servant asked if he meant he was ordered to stop them. The Count looked back, thinking that the servant should obey any order without a word of complaint. He asked why the servant kept repeating the question, stating that his only job was to do exactly as he was told. Upon hearing that, Almam immediately moved against the Count without hesitation. Having defeated him, he spoke about how he would resolve the situation. Alman replied that it was simply because he enjoyed strategy games. He mentioned it had been quite fun so far. Hadan, the operator of Blue Moon, held a creed taught by the Red Moon, so they moved according to his control. He stated that if anyone attempted to harm the Great Moon, they had permission to act on their own. Retaking his posture, he said that was exactly why he had been waiting for those specific words. He mentioned it would truly make it 2 years. Broken and defeated, leaning against his balcony, the Count declared that his subordinates wouldn't let Almam get away with this. Almam replied that with those very words the Count just spoke, Avalon would disappear from the continent forever. He called it a pity, noting that the Great Moon had given them a chance. Roadmill was beautiful. Truly a paradise. The protagonist woke up whenever he wanted to wake up. He ate whatever he wanted to eat. He had finally managed to live a genuinely aristocratic life. While they were happily enjoying breakfast, the knight received a letter and showed it to the protagonist. Reading the letter left him in shock, as it informed him of Leo's death. Just like that, his trial version of paradise ended in barely 3 days. He was returning to the Palato family once again. Looking at the servants, they seemed afraid and distressed. The protagonist wondered why their reactions were like that. His knight asked since when the protagonist had annihilated and destroyed Avalon. He was left stunned. So now he was in a simulation of continuously occurring complex situations, dropped right in the middle of it all. It was a difficult position, he said, asking his knight to explain so he could understand why he had become the master. The knight replied that it was because he was the only one who stood to benefit. Since the Count was eliminated after they left the estate, the protagonist had become the heir with a perfect alibi. The protagonist stood frozen, trying to absorb all this information. Evan said that Avalon was also gone, so there was nothing left to bother him. He added that, just like that, the protagonist had become the master of the family, the one who commanded agents at the level of swordmasters. The protagonist asked if that was supposed to be funny. He wondered where he should even begin to solve this. He argued that there shouldn't be any organization capable of annihilating an underworld power in an instant. Speaking of which, he remembered saying there was an organization that acts in the morning. The knight wondered if he was talking about Blue Moon. He said yes and asked if it was their fault. The knight replied that the Information Guild said it probably wasn't Blue Moon. They say Blue Moon never leaves traces, but always leaves their sigil. But Avalon had been defeated in direct combat. They said it was a scene of total destruction. With a skeptical look, the protagonist remarked that, so this was how he became a master, complete with a sword master. In his head, he noted that Blue Moon hadn't appeared in the game. There was no way the ones responsible were weak agents who disappeared before the original story even began. He wondered who it could be. At the orphanage, Utia asked if they had left any traces. Ryan said they hadn't left any. Her alarm affirmed the same thing. There were no signs of them. Only the evidence of the defeat of Avalon's forces remained. McCallion spoke up, saying they had arrived and that Avalon's remaining forces numbered 486, exactly as the boss had said. Ladan ordered them to defeat them completely and annihilate them. Utia was very happy about them doing this and said it was perfect, with a smile on her face. And just like that, the massive organization of Avalon, which had dominated the kingdom of Asteria in mere 5 days, turned to dust. It ended in destruction. Laden mentioned, however, that it seemed the operation hadn't been concluded perfectly. Utia asked what he meant. He said they found additional nobles who were involved. He said this while holding an envelope in his hand. He mentioned it was from Altia, who seemed especially deeply involved. Seeing this, she said he already knew what she was going to say. Confident, she rested her sword on her shoulder. Ladan responded that he would take care of it alone, discreetly. A small hint from the transmigrator appeared, saying that Road Mill was a cozy village with a mild climate throughout the year. The protagonist was taking coffee on his balcony, observing the beautiful city and the birds. Upon hearing that Ladan would handle things alone, Utia asked about the Information Guild. She wanted to know if they were keeping matters clean. Ryan confirmed they were. They were treating this incident as unrelated to Blue Moon. McCallion added that all the guilds were doing the same. They were calling it the hellscape forged by the Swordmaster. She asked if they were still monitoring his movements. Utia told them to keep it up. These matters must never reach him. She said she'd told them countless times, and they all knew it. McCallion stated that if they suffered damage before reaching their goal, it wasn't an order. They were the sword. Hand on her face, Utia questioned if a sword didn't think for itself. She declared that Blue Moon must only move under direct command. She told them to keep that in mind. He knew everything. Never disappoint him. In his head, he wondered. He couldn't understand how someone like Utia, with such overwhelming power, could feel anxiety and fear just from the possibility of being discovered. She said everything was for the Great Moon. For him, exhausted in his office, overflowing with papyruses and books, the protagonist was tired. He said he couldn't do this anymore. After the funeral, he'd been swamped for an entire month. He just wanted to eat and relax. He asserted that that's what nobles do. He said he'd made many enemies, he was sure of it. But Leo's departure was supposed to be 6 years from now. Since his siblings' fates had shifted in the timeline, all family matters had fallen squarely on him. The heir, sitting in his chair, he saw all his servants with various books, photos, and papyruses ready for him. Looking at it all, he wondered why everyone was suddenly working so hard. When the Count used to be around, they were always much more relaxed. As the servants delivered things, they looked at the protagonist, who wore a serious expression. They kept asking if he was angry, and said they would have to work harder, fearing severe consequences. They spoke with great fear. The protagonist thought it must be because of those rumors about him being a shadow mastermind. He just wanted them to handle things on their own. Roasting meat in the fireplace, his knight spoke up. He knew he'd said it before, but it was still surprising. Reaching the second circle with only 2 years of self-taught study meant he was incredibly talented. He said it usually took about 4 years of guidance to reach that level, and magic itself couldn't be used without innate talent. He replied that he guessed he wasn't doing too badly then. In his mind, he noted he'd been practicing a lot lately, mainly for self-defense, since things had gotten tense. This technique also required precise mana control. He said this while practicing and eating in his dining room. He wondered what the goal was. He was only halfway there. The protagonist said he couldn't believe he was actually using magic in a fantasy world. He said this looking at his hand, while controlling his new power. He admitted that in the beginning it was exciting. While practicing, he used to say that once his plans were complete, there would be no more danger. So, he would keep studying alone and slowly. But lately, with self-preservation becoming crucial, he realized a hard truth. His mana capacity was very small. He said nothing was working out. Mana capacity is something you're born with. It's like a natural athlete's physique, and his was tiny. Limited training couldn't solve it. Holding the letter, Evan said the protagonist finally got the invitation to the ball. Confused, Alan wondered what ball. Dressed in beautiful robes, a gold necklace, a cravat, and other items, the protagonist arrived at the beautiful ballroom. He sighed and said he was already tired. This was a regular ball held in the southern part of the Esteria Kingdom to promote high-level networking. He said that since he was about to become a count, perhaps he should seize this opportunity to create some connections. Building ties with other nobles was essential for a peaceful future. But then, when he arrived at the ball, he went to speak with others, and they started backing away in fear of him. Feeling awkward, Evan covered his mouth and asked him not to be upset. Slightly bothered that people had moved away from him, he said he already expected this. He said he was going back in. He knew they would despise him for being unpolished, unlike the glory days of his great-grandfather. The current Palladio family was known as the infamous ones of the East, but he didn't go there without a plan. He grabbed a glass of wine and set out to use his social skills to try and charm everyone. With the wine glass in hand, he started talking about its unique flavor. Smelling its aroma, surprised, he said it was an intense scent and that he would love to take a few bottles home. He said this with a very focused expression. He thought he was doing everything right, but his smile didn't seem natural for normal socializing. The woman he was speaking to became very uncomfortable and started to withdraw. She said she would ask her father to prepare some bottles for him right away. With a bored expression, he remarked that this wasn't going as planned. Behind him, several people were whispering that he was more difficult than his brothers ever were. They thought he had just pressured the young lady into handing over the limited edition wine. Not wanting to admit he caused fear, he refused to say he failed. He just said she might be a very shy, noble lady. Eating nonstop, Evan mentioned he'd managed to get another item for his collection of various things acquired that day. Disheartened, the protagonist said he had studied wine diligently. It turned out that Palladio had a reputation even worse than he thought, and after the rumor spread that he had dealt with those troublesome siblings, everyone started avoiding him. Alone in the party hall, he watched several people ignoring him and asked what the point of networking was. He thought they seemed even more distant now. Sad, he said he was going to get some air. Still eating, his knight said it was fine. A beautiful young woman with long red hair was watching it all. On the balcony, he wondered where everything went wrong. Behind him, a voice appeared, asking if he could spare a little of his time for her. He wondered if she wanted to talk to him. He asked who it was in his head. Turning around, he saw a beautiful young woman named Loria, the third daughter of the Duke of Altia. He said yes, she could speak with him. The Altia family was one of the 3 great shadow powers of psychedelia, known as the infamous ones of the North. In his mind, he thought that anyone approaching him must have ulterior motives. He wondered why he didn't remember her. In the game, he didn't think he had ever seen her before. Loria said she would be direct. She asked for a deal for him to lend his strength. She said she would be in great danger soon. A useful tip: in the library of the Palladio mansion, you can find some personal development books. The protagonist appeared reading a book that referred to introductory thinking. 12 ways to make a good impression. Loria is begging Alon for strength. She wants protection. She says she has been protected as his father's mistress's daughter until now, but the Duke of Altia is gravely injured and ill. Her siblings are going to destroy her. The protagonist says it's a life or death risk for all of them. In his head, the protagonist thinks it's no wonder he doesn't remember. She should have already left by now. That's why she never appeared in the game. She says that with the power he possesses, he could make a difference on his own. Before she finishes the sentence, Alan refuses. She is shocked by his response. She says she isn't asking for the service for free. She says if he helps her, she'll give him half the house of Altia. Uncaring about the proposal, he turns his back and says he's leaving now. Walking away, he thinks that he feels bad for her, but he can barely manage his own life. Imagine hers. He tells himself he shouldn't get involved. He says that even if he wanted to help, contrary to the royal rumors, he has no real power. Loria is on the balcony now, very sad and discouraged with her life. She could be in danger at any moment. Before leaving, the protagonist puts his left hand on his neck, raises his head, and says something good will come her way. An observer was watching everything. They say the Altia family is approaching the Great Moon. They say they will have to transmit something good to the Red Moon as well. Rhine says that won't be necessary. According to the information, she is the only Altia not linked to Avalon. That means Loria is not one of Ladan's targets. Responding to Rhine, McCallion says this makes things easier. The other Altias will all be dealt with anyway. Rhine agrees, saying everything is in accordance with the Red Moon's commands. They say they must concentrate on stopping any information about the Avalon incident from reaching the protagonist. At the ball's banquet hall, the protagonist notes that the surroundings are quiet. He wonders if there is some kind of barrier around him, because no one is standing next to him. A woman with red hair approaches him and says hi. The protagonist, in his head, can't believe that hi was aimed directly at him. He thinks perhaps this time he can really socialize with the nobles for the first time. Looking at her, he wonders if she isn't another hidden master. He says he doesn't remember her in the game. He speaks to himself, saying, of course, when someone comes to talk to him first, it's never an ordinary noble. He responds to her, speaking her name. Kalia is surprised to learn that he knows her and asks about it. The protagonist says, of course, and that she is quite known. After all, she was one of the 3 dark forces of that kingdom. With a smile on her very beautiful face, she wonders if she really is famous. She was the eldest daughter of Count Zenonia, Kalia. Palladio is a gang, so Zenonia is a smarter syndicate with a business scheme. Feeling a bit sullen in his head, the protagonist says he only wants good connections for a peaceful, noble life. Although the plan is sort of ruined, he says that for the sake of his sweet life, he never gets involved. He bows to her and asks why she is so beautiful. She thanks him for the compliment. With an enigmatic smile, she wonders if he doesn't want to talk more. Alon says he would like to, but too many eyes are watching them now. In his head, he begs her to let him go in peace. Kalia says the rumors were true. She says she is anxious to see him again. Thus, she says goodbye to him and walks away. He wonders suddenly what that was all about. Again, observing everything, Ryan says the information concerning the Avalon incident is being adequately contained. Macrian responds, saying there is something new they must worry about. There is a man at the window, up in a tree, observing the protagonist. Fi says that since there was no command, they will just watch and deal with it if necessary. The next day, Alon and his knight are in a canyon, looking for something. Evan says it is still daytime and wonders if the sky is still strangely dark inside there. In his head, the protagonist speaks, saying he finally found his true objective. The field effects should be the same. He says if this third one is also a failure, he is going to cry. Upon entering the canyon, he sees some shiny marks on the rocks and walls of the gorge. The protagonist says this time, it's real. Seeing that, he says it's easy to find in the game. The true reason he used the ball as an excuse to travel south was because of the labyrinth down there. It was the Labyrinth of Whispers. It's to solve riddles in 8 rooms. You win a valuable artifact as a reward. Happy. Everything comes to his mind. He says he already knows the step-by-step walkthrough by heart. It's time to show his experience. Looking at the entrance, he is very impressed because he is seeing this in real life instead of behind a screen. Even though he visited this place countless times in the game, it seems different. He says even the canyon itself where they are is different. It looks like someone really put effort into creating it. His knight got very curious and asked how he knows about places like that. He says he goes there often. Evan didn't believe that he goes there often. Entering the portal, he looks at his knight, laughing, and says he's joking. He says he has his ways. He calls him to advance into the portal. The knight asks him to please stop joking with that face. Entering the portal, several red monsters appear, looking like demons ready to attack them. With his hand on his chin, the knight speaks. He thinks the demons will defeat him instantly if he gets the riddle wrong. In his head, Evan keeps wondering how the protagonist stays so calm in a situation like this. It's practically high risk, and he just watches him do it. He asks himself, since Alan never left the property, how could he know all of that? Happy, the protagonist turns and speaks to his knight. He says he solved it, and that they have to wait for something to finish before opening. Still thinking, the knight says that even so, everyone follows the protagonist because good things always happen afterward. With a half-scared face, the knight wonders what the protagonist is doing this time. Feeling a bit nervous, he watches the gate open and feels nauseous at the scene. He knew, but still didn't think it was so intense in person. He had to look away. He barely maintained his composure. Impressed, his knight says it's finally over. With the gate open, inside there are various jewels, coins, and valuable things. Without any expression, the protagonist said yes. He says to just take the black ring and get out of there immediately. The knight said the black ring looks like the most useless thing in sight. Upon taking the ring, the protagonist puts it on his finger. Loose, he says it's a little big. Alan speaks to his knight. He says if he touches anything else, they will only have misfortune, and orders him to put the gold bars on the floor. Looking at the ring, Alan said he finally obtained the oath. Leaving there, the protagonist tells the knight not to worry. He says there is nothing dangerous on the way back. Walking away, the protagonist turned all his attention outward. He spoke that thanks to the walkthrough, it was very easy. Evan asks a question, wondering if he predicted all of that, and if that pile of stones inside the canyon was a golem. He grabs his sword and says there has to be a way to get the protagonist out of there. Very confident about it, Alan wasn't scared. He says he will take care of that with a ring on his hand. The golems were extremely large and probably very powerful. There was more than one. They all had weapons in hand. They were very big. The protagonist was face to face with them. With the ring in his hand, Alan says he will invoke an oath. With that, an enormous white light came out of his hand, emanating a lot of power. It was a fragment inherited from the great will of Niakla. He is going to proffer the 2 vows that can be decreed. In the game, this part remained a spoiler, but he looks in front of him, and there is a face with a voice again. It speaks, saying the reward of the labyrinth, the oath, grants a power that can have a cost, just as the name implies. Again, in his head, he says the voice almost makes it seem like the place is real. With his hands intertwined, he says he implores the absolute use of the sigils of Babylon when casting magic. The strange voice asks what he seeks through that vow. He says he seeks power to bend the laws of the world a little more. She grants the request. And the second one, with hands in the shape of a triangle, he says he implores the limited use of the incantations of Babylon when casting that magic. She hesitates again to grant his second request. He says he wants the same wish. The voice fell silent. Looking up, the protagonist didn't understand what had happened. In his head, he said he ruined everything. He said he even imitated the icon just to guarantee it. There, he must choose both the sigils and incantations concerning the oaths to maximize his maximum magical attack power. Thanks to repeating it countless times, He knows all the sigils and incantations used in the game. Still looking up, he says this has to work. After much waiting, she says she accepts. She speaks of a human who remembers the ancient testaments of a forgotten god. She thanks him and says she will always watch over him, the heir to the testament. After all that, his knight is very desperate. He is afraid his master will be defeated, because the golems were very powerful in his view. He says what Alon is going to do isn't enough. Without sketching any reaction, the protagonist opens his hand and makes an apparently very powerful force emerge. It was the lightning sphere that should be shining intensely. He speaks, saying it's weak even after gathering all his mana. In his head, he says it doesn't matter how much he trains, this will probably be his limit. He says it looking at the lightning sphere. Then he says it's time to test. Gathering all his mana strength into that sphere, he says the oath has its price. While he was very serious doing that, he looks at his hand and notices the ring came off his thumb. He speaks that it is very strange. Facing down the golems, the protagonist announced it was time to test the oath. Refraction. Rebound. A massive, gigantic sphere of lightning manifested. He launched the orb at the golems. Watching it unfold, the knight was stunned to see such immense raw power radiating from the protagonist. Unleashing all that energy, he defeated every single golem in one blow, transforming them into scattered bolts of electricity. Afterwards, still wearing a shocked expression, the knight called it crazy. He said it was awesome. He asked if the protagonist had been hiding that kind of power. The protagonist said absolutely not. The knight remarked that in his 15 years as a mercenary, he had never seen anything like it. Looking beyond, he asked if that really was just second-tier magic. The protagonist confirmed it was. He added that he didn't realize it would be that strong either. He was certain it wasn't that powerful in the game. The game used a turn-based battle system. Magic could be strengthened with sigils or enchantments once per turn. This time, he used a chain lightning spell, reinforced over 5 loops, utilizing 4 enchantments and 1 sigil, all to configure a large-scale scenario simulating a real lightning strike. Furthermore, he received the cost of the oath. He must always use 1 sigil and 1 enchantment for magic, and that was why his magic doubled in power, thanks to the requests granted by the god. In his head, he noted that even so, second-tier magic was a complete exaggeration. He admitted he was surprised himself. The result far exceeded his expectations. Sitting down, the knight said this part was harder than the actual battle. He asked who had built this horrible place. Internally, the protagonist recalled that the Labyrinth of Whispers used to have another name. Back then, community guides and publications circulated online. Before long, it became known as Palaron's Labyrinth. The protagonist stated that Palaron was the one who made it. Holding on to the knight, the protagonist said they were heading back east. It had been 3 weeks, and he mentioned there was something he wanted to do when they returned. Evan replied that he was more diligent than he looked. In the game, combining a sigil with the magic's attribute increased power, and compatible enchantments improved its characteristics. However, unlike the game, where the visuals stayed the same and only damage numbers increased, this time every enchantment visibly altered the magic's form. He thought that even his mana, perhaps because he was specially good at mana control, allowed him to see the characteristic changes. He decided that as soon as his mana recovered, he had to test it again. Anyway, he was happy everything had worked out. Up in a tree, Rena was observing everything that happened with the protagonist. She went to the canyon to see what it was. She spoke of the Alanek Empire script, the era of forgotten outer gods. She read the messages on the walls, noting that he blocked the shadow invasion and defeated Akulaka, the one who claimed faithful hearts. That was the Radiant Emperor, the great Palaron. She only knew this because she was born above an ancient library with the mission of remembering the sacred. Thus, it contained much knowledge of ancient histories. Back in the tree, watching the protagonist, she said she knew something was wrong from the moment the queen followed him. Continuing the history, Palaron felt honored that the Great Moon called him friend, and the enchantments he whispered weren't even recorded in the ancient library. The protagonist wondered who he was. Leaving that canyon, Rena said the Red Moon was right about everything. She felt ashamed for having obeyed orders so blindly. She looked to the side and asked if someone was there. McCallion appeared, and she asked if he found the information. He said no, and reported that the man in black had been neutralized. He mentioned he was shot down suddenly out of the air. Rena said they needed to report this before dealing with the situation. So, they returned to their home. Kalia, drinking coffee in her home, remarked that it wasn't just a rumor then. The protagonist was emotionless to the point of being scary, eyes like an abyss. She agreed that Count Zenonia was powerful and famous, and yet, for someone like her, who never even attended social events, he could be considered famous. She kept wondering because that night, the protagonist said she was very famous. That was her reporting everything to her father. With an intense look, she said, nobody knew she was the one really acting as the head of the family, having manipulated her father. She wondered how the protagonist realized it, and she remembered that the protagonist even noticed the spy she herself placed to watch him. In the hallway of her house, the guard shouted for her, saying she must go immediately to her room. Arriving in the bedroom, she found the lifeless man. The guard said that since the seal hadn't activated, it seemed he hadn't revealed the secret. Kelia thought about the protagonist, who placed her spy in her room, and asked how he discovered the new alignment. With anger, she said he had cornered her from the very moment they met. Back in the Duke of Altier's territory, Loria realized the protagonist was no ordinary man, just as she'd suspected. He was the noble of the underworld, possessing eyes as cold and sharp as his father's. He was exactly the kind of person one should never make an enemy of. He had been her last lifeline, yet he wouldn't accept a deal that brought him heavy losses. Her cowardly brothers had stripped her of all wealth and power. There was nothing left for him. She had barely survived, clinging to her father's mercy and affection. What was she supposed to do now? Upon arriving home, her maids cried out that the young lady had returned. They told her that her brothers, Pylene and Kig, had suddenly died. The news completely shocked her. She hadn't expected this at all. In her mind, she wondered why those who betrayed their own family for gain would depart like this. It made no sense. Even worse, she wondered about her other two brothers. They too had perished in the conflict. While she was absorbing all this bad news, Ladan of the Great Nation emerged, stating that the operation was complete. She remembered the protagonist telling her that something good would happen to her. Suddenly, she realized that the true mastermind behind the Count's house had hidden his intentions, waiting for his chance. So that's what he meant. Just like that, overnight, she became the sole heir to the Duchy of Altia. Terrified, she wondered what kind of formidable figure she had just made a contract with, but it couldn't be undone. She knew what happened to those who betrayed him. There were already too many examples. Now, she could only keep walking the path she had chosen. 2 months later, a man appeared at the protagonist's house, stating he came by order of the Duchy of Altia. The protagonist wondered why he was there. It was a box, so he took it and opened it to see what was inside. It was wine. This specific wine was worth thousands of gold coins per bottle. The knight said he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Along with the wine was a very respectful note from Loria. The protagonist realized it wasn't the Duke, but the youngest Loria, who had prepared this. He wondered why she would send it. He already felt guilty for not having helped enough. The protagonist asked the delivery man if the wine was really for him. The man replied yes, saying the Duke had prepared it personally and ordered it delivered directly to the protagonist. Shocked, he understood. He wondered if Loria had become the new Duchess of Altia. Meanwhile, in her office, Loria stretched and remarked that 2 hectic months had flown by. After her father's funeral, he had died of illness. She held the succession ceremony and became Duchess. Although the losses of her brothers were sudden, she avoided all suspicion thanks to an alibi called a ball. Back then, even her secret organization had been neutralized by her brothers. So, when she returned to the mansion, she truly had no energy left because everyone was against her. Realizing this gave her chills. She noted that he used that situation to his advantage. He acted indifferent on the outside, but then handled everything flawlessly. She wondered how many steps ahead the protagonist was thinking. He hadn't even informed her about the funeral to avoid bothering her. She figured he must have reached out because he needed Altia for some plan. She had unified all the organizations under Altia's banner, but she still hadn't reached the power the protagonist hid. That meant he wanted something else from her. He was an underworld mogul who built his influence solely through business. Loria knew the only thing he lacked, which she possessed, was the fearsome name that manipulated shadow politics, the reputation of Altia. Now she had to concentrate on what needed to be done. Her noble benefactor would contact her soon. She hoped he liked the gift she sent, saying this with a happy, hopeful look on her face. At the protagonist's house, the messenger departed after the delivery. The protagonist was shocked, thinking that Loria had already faced grave threats and become an adult. He wondered why she was acting strangely again. Something seemed off somehow. A few months later, 5 years before the story's beginning, his knight asked if he should call Alon Count now. He replied not officially until the succession ceremony, but yes, come the turn of the year, he thought the title fit. In his head, he mused that becoming a clan wasn't part of his perfect life plan. He wanted a sweet life in psychedelia. The principles of that sweet life were avoid inheritance disputes, settle down in the southern village, and embark on a gourmet journey, but nothing he planned was working out. He admitted that now that he was used to it, he had learned to maximize the advantages of being a noble. The work-life balance was surprisingly good. Evan handed him a letter from Utia. The protagonist asked his knight if he had found any information regarding those responsible for what happened to Leo. The knight said nothing was confirmed yet, but the Information Guild was investigating thoroughly, and they would wait and see. He asked what the protagonist's purpose in knowing was. Was it revenge? Sitting in a chair, the protagonist pondered. He concluded that the small differences from the game were likely butterfly effects caused by himself. He replied to his knight that he just wanted to be prepared, out of concern, in case something happened to him. Opening the letter, he said he could imagine what it was about this time. She reported that everything was going smoothly, and she was happy for all of them. Daily life at the orphanage, accustomed to exchanging letters every month, had gradually warmed everyone's hearts. But still, reading the letter, the protagonist realized he had never actually seen the children's faces. Yet, seeing these kids grow up with his support made him smile like a proud father. After reading the letter, he asked how old those 5 children were. The knight said it was time for them to integrate into society. The end of the letter contained a thank you to the protagonist for raising the children. Letter in hand, the protagonist agreed. He thought it was time to send them away. Confused, Evan asked if these weren't the children he kept close because they were fragile. He replied that there was no longer any need. They had grown up well, and it was time to think about their future. In his head, he noted that they had been cared for enough so they wouldn't wake up in the worst way possible. They would manage on their own. Every major challenge had complex backstories explained through narration. Euthia had a talent for faith, Macallion for the sword, Rhine for research, Seolang for combat, and Ladan had a talent for devotion. The protagonist thought that if he assigned the right roles, each of them should be capable of occupying a key position. He said perhaps he should give each of them a gift. After all, he was already planning something for them eventually. In his office, he stretched and announced that he had finished writing the letter. Having slept while waiting for the protagonist to finish, the knight said it was time to leave. Watching the knight depart, the protagonist thought the children might do well later on. They would receive a reward for it. He told the children to take his letter and go out into the free world. Euthia said the requests arrived with the letters in hand. She mentioned that this time, exceptionally, each of them received one directly. They all took the letters, started reading, and were happy with the messages inside. Euthia suggests reading the old letters first. She notes their skills are quite advanced now. The release of these guidelines means they've decided it's time for everyone to see them. Previously, only Euthia had permission. Reading these letters will help them learn how to converse with people. Euthia explained that from the beginning, he instructed them to disguise their interactions as normal conversation and to simply review the letters. She noted this is the first official directive since the initial greeting letter. Their mission is to reach an emotion candidate and then report back on the situation. He entrusted this task to the Blue Moon. The letter states that the protagonist personally selected each of them. This was done, essentially, to prevent any secrets from leaking. She emphasized the necessity of completely understanding these guidelines before carrying out the mission. Macrean asked if they should visit in person or use a magical communication device. Ladan questioned why, if leaks were such a concern, they were deliberately using physical letters. Euthia replied, reminding him that they simply follow orders. Seolang, very happy, started reading the letters to learn the guidelines. One letter stated the protagonist wanted Macallion to go to Caliburn, the nation of knights. Seolang's instructions were to head to a colony, though she complained she didn't like desserts. Ladan was assigned to Laxius, the city of entertainment. Rhine was sent to Lartania, the labyrinth city, and Euthia was to go to the holy kingdom of Rosardo. She confirmed that each letter detailed exactly what they needed to do. Macallion mentioned he didn't know why, but the protagonist instructed him to become a knight. The letter assured them that support would remain constant, so they shouldn't worry. It also noted that the locations of their gifts were listed. They would discover them upon arrival. Before they departed, Euthia reminded everyone that mentioning the Blue Moon was strictly forbidden. With that, they all set off for the locations designated by the protagonist. 3 months later, the protagonist sat in his office. He noted there was still no information regarding the artifacts or magical alterations. They would have to test them personally. He asked his knight for updates on those responsible for Leo's fate. The knight replied that the Information Guild hadn't discovered anything yet. Hearing this, the protagonist thought to himself, as a result of his interference here and there while saving the 5 great sins, the butterfly effect had become uncontrollable. He couldn't understand why. Loria, who shouldn't have survived, had become the Duchess of Altea. Meanwhile, the forces of the underworld were growing alarmingly strong. He told his knight they would stop investigating those responsible. In his own mind, he decided it was safer this way. In such an environment, almost nothing could escape the Information Guild's network. Digging into external missions would only mean unnecessary preparation for unknown situations, leading to grave consequences. Besides, these secret societies didn't touch anything that didn't interfere with them. They wouldn't attack unless he approached first. The protagonist stated that further investigation seemed pointless. The knight agreed and said he would give the order to cease the investigation. Happy to move on, The knight then informed the protagonist that Macallion had officially become a knight in Caliburn. Another 3 months later, Evan informed the protagonist that Macallion had formed his own knightly order. The protagonist asked if they were at least at the expert level. The knight responded with rumors that within 10 years, a 5th Knight Master would emerge. Alon clarified that Knight Masters were those called the Swords of Caliburn, individuals overflowing with true talent. He added that Caliburn would likely become several times more chaotic now. A year after the 5 Great Sins became independent, just as they were getting accustomed to the county following the succession ceremony, the knight approached the protagonist with incredible news. Macallion had become one of the 5 Swords of Caliburn, a Knight Master. The protagonist was stunned. He wondered if only true sword masters could achieve that rank. The sword masters of Psychedelia surpass mere aura blades. They are superhumans who have unlocked their unique ability, derivation. Evan explained that, truthfully, Macallion hadn't produced a derivation just yet. However, he won a match against the 4th sword, and the nation granted him the title. Caliburn had recently lost a Knight Master in the conflict with the North. Hearing this, the protagonist acknowledged that they had indeed been at war for over a decade. The knight noted that it usually takes 15 years to awaken and control the power of imagery, and decades for derivation. The first sword became the youngest Knight Master at age 32. Having wielded a sword since he was 5. That was an absolutely incredible feat of strength, yet even with his talent, it took over 20 years. The protagonist couldn't believe a novice had reached the rank of Knight Master in just 1 year. He thought to himself that if Macallion only lacked derivation, he might soon surpass even the protagonist himself as a sword master. He wondered if he might receive a letter himself. He looked at his desk, but it was empty. His knight said he certainly wouldn't get one. The protagonist replied that the problem was that only Yutia ever received letters. Even after she went to the Holy Kingdom, the letters kept coming, filled with greetings from the sins they grew up with. They must be communicating amongst themselves. The protagonist thought to himself that they never truly knew him anyway. Still, a thank you for the gifts would have been nice. He wanted the others to communicate with him, and he felt a little disappointed. He decided to reconnect with his original intention. He reasoned that since they had awakened as the 5 Great Sins, the kingdom could have faced immense trouble, so they should just be grateful they were all okay. Holding the letter and looking out the large window, he said that as long as the children were eating and living well, that was enough for him. In Curden, the central district of Caliburn's capital, stood a high-ranking noble residence. This was the mansion hosting the renowned Eclipse Knights of Caliburn. Escalar Macallion, the young Knight Master and commander of the Eclipse Knights, was the youngest ever to achieve that rank. He looked out the window and saw his sister waving at him. Even after a year, remembering the past still made him feel ashamed. He had lost everything to the shadows. All that had remained was uncontrollable anger and resentment. The Great Moon saved his life, though that alone wasn't enough reason to swear loyalty. But because of the promise that he could seek justice on his own terms, he obeyed as the Blue Moon. Now serving in that role, he faced continuous risky training missions. Although his own safety didn't matter, he performed missions for years to establish a position among the shadows. For the first time, he had received a personal directive. Reading the letter, he spoke aloud, the question echoing in his mind, noting that gifts like this weren't particularly welcome. Arriving at a house, he hesitated to open the door immediately, wondering what could be inside. When he finally opened it, he was struck by intense light and completely overwhelmed. Within that seemingly random directive, the gift from the Great Moon was something unexpected, a family, just like his own. Without thinking, he ran and embraced the girl, weeping uncontrollably. Overwhelmed with emotion, Macallion falls to his knees and embraces his sister. He thought he had lost her forever, yet here she was, alive right in front of him. Eyes brimming with tears, he asks what happened to her after they were separated. They moved to a cafe to talk properly. As they settled in, she began to explain. She told him that after being torn away from him and taken by them, she waited in darkness for a long time for orders. She was confined in a very bleak and terrifying place. When her turn finally came, she faced great danger. Yet, she managed to escape using the light and survived. Years later, when she was almost taken by a malicious group, a mercenary named Evan saved her. Since then, she has continued to receive precious medicine and support. She showed him a card, explaining that the aid keeps arriving under the name Palatio. She assured him she is safe and told him not to worry about their brothers either. These were words from the protagonist. Macallion was astounded. He realized it was the protagonist who had saved her and helped her through that entire ordeal. He risked his own name for his protege. Macallion wondered how the Great Moon even knew. He had never spoken about his family or himself. Even Utia had only vaguely mentioned she was taken by the black sheep. Yet somehow he knew everything. Every doubt fell into place like a puzzle piece and vanished. He hadn't understood Utia's anxiety before, but the fool was him. Looking back, he realized the protagonist already knew the truth and had hinted that the child would survive on her own. After replaying everything he had lived through while knowing almost nothing, his sister called him back to the present. In his mind, Kalia noted that the sword acted on its own, but he must have taken that into generous consideration. For Macallion, consumed by revenge and resentment against the black sheep, his family's survival was an incomparable gift. He wasn't blindly devoted, but he had a debt to repay. His mission was to become the pinnacle of Caliban, the Master Knight, to form an elite guard of the finest swordsmen. In his new quarters, a man appeared, addressing Macallion as commander and announcing it was time. He had assembled a troop of warriors for an expedition that would serve as training for the solar eclipse. He said the protagonist would be pleased once he conveyed his gratitude along with his results. He claimed he proved it under the moon. The Eclipse Knights departed on an expedition to confront the barbarian tribes. He led his troop into a frozen wasteland. Resting later, the protagonist remarked on how peaceful everything was. Perhaps it was because the children had grown up. He picked up his pen and began to write. After returning from the labyrinth, he had focused on studying enchantments. He learned refraction, which strengthens magic's imperfections and expands distribution area. Reflection compresses shape and transfers a launched projectile. Blue light perfects magic in parallel with lightning, and linear vibration means penetration, granting a critical hit. While taking notes and reading, he noted that with his mana hole, he could only cast magic once a day. It took him a long time to figure that out. Babylonian enchantments and symbols were forgotten in this environment, so there was no information. Even where they were written down, there were no explanations. Finally, through direct research, he began to appreciate magic meant for self-defense. With that, he started a 2-month test experiment. In his head, he directed the process: eliminate the accumulated mana center, causing imbalance to generate lightning. This magic seemed weak and useless. Fixation, compression. Through reciting the enchantments, gathering gradually gained a purpose. A fleeting blossoming. He realized the order of enchantments mattered too. He managed to create extraordinary power. After months of research, he was finally managing to gather his power and control his mana. When he started with indestructible magic, he failed. As he stood there, a little gentleman appeared. They were impressed. She asked, "Origin, you mean?" The protagonist looked at them, apprehensive. In his head, he wondered why she was there. The unique magic Origin is the domain of a 7th-level mage. The little gentleman spoke about the magic just cast. The protagonist wondered about this Origin magic with a look of concern on his face. Kalia and an older gentleman waited in Count Palladio's reception room, expecting the protagonist for a talk. In her mind, Kalia reflected that she had come for 2 clear reasons. First, to confirm Count Palladio's intentions regarding a letter that could strategically cripple Zenonia. Second, to use magic to gauge the strength of the organization protecting him, as well as the power Palladio had assumed. Yet, what she discovered was that arrogant mage looking fearful. Biaquel, a 5th-class mage exiled to the Mage Tower for forbidden experiments, was a powerful figure capable of easily taking on a division of soldiers. He had maintained an arrogant attitude for a long time, even toward her, his backer. He had clung to that arrogance, yet now, she could feel deep fear emanating from him. She had never seen him like this before. It made her wonder if that magic earlier really was of the Origin style. Dressed appropriately for conversation, the Count arrived in the room to speak with them, wondering why they had come. Kalia apologized for the sudden, inconvenient visit, claiming she had wandered in hoping to meet him. He replied that he wouldn't blame her, but one thing needed to be clear. What she used was not Origin magic. If classified, her magic would rank around 2nd place. He added that the mages likely sensed it, but the magic itself was ineffective. Internally, he noted that it unfortunately couldn't be used for offensive or defensive purposes. In other words, it was best to keep from them exactly what. Out loud, he told her she must have been mistaken. In his mind, the protagonist felt relieved to have escaped that situation. Now that the misunderstanding was cleared up, he said, they would return to the main topic. She explained that she had finished some tasks nearby and came to pay her respects. The protagonist asked if it was a special occasion, adding that unfortunately he had work to do and couldn't talk for long. Kalia stood up, saying she understood, and thanking him for his precious time. She announced she was leaving. Alon told her that if she needed anything, he would be there. He suggested she might want to meet the Duke of Altea, adding that the two of them would get along very well. She didn't care for his response but hid it, saying she would visit the Duke. She then departed in her carriage. The knight wondered why a noble house from the west would visit the protagonist's home. He replied that he didn't know. Nothing came to mind. Internally, he found the whole thing irritating. If the false rumor spread that he had used an origin, those eager for a power struggle would cause problems. He wanted none of that. On the way home, Kalia and the gentleman began to question if it really had been origin magic, the magic that featured niches of, he insisted it wasn't an origin. Origin magic draws its own laws upon the canvas of immutable principles, permitted only to the greatest mages, but the Count was different. Using the observation she had requested, the magic he saw within the Count was altering reality itself. It was distorting immutable principles, fixing rays, establishing and collapsing laws. He spoke in an altered state, awed by the sheer amount of magic the Count possessed. Yet the magic still manifested, an impossible miracle. Behind it, clearly, lay the magic of a great, forgotten god. Thinking on this while recounting the events, he raised a hand to his head in discomfort. He said he needed to stop thinking about it. Anything further was too risky. He claimed he had once explored ancestral knowledge through studies of forgotten era magic, enough to earn accolades. Therefore, he could say with certainty that one should never oppose or cross Count Palatio. After hearing his reports, Macallion decided it was useless to try and understand the Count's intentions. She said it might be worth visiting the Duke of Altea after all. Internally, she noted that his suggestion had already taken root in her mind. 5 months later, it had been nearly 2 years since the children became independent. In his office, the protagonist called for his knight and asked for new information or news about them. That would be even better. The knight replied it wasn't about the children, but that the Zenonia and Altea families had formed an alliance. Hearing this, the protagonist stopped what he was doing, stunned. He wondered if powerful shadow figures had formed an alliance. Evan explained it was a secret pact, not easily visible, but confirmed nonetheless. His mind racing, the protagonist noted he had worked hard to elevate his goals, and now, a secret alliance? He questioned it internally. The kingdom of Eyster was in danger. The news had left him deeply worried. He wondered aloud if his words back then had actually helped her speak with the Duchess. Feigning indifference, the protagonist suggested it was probably just a temporary alliance. Yet, given Altea's firm and arrogant personality, he wondered what it could really mean. Even so, he decided it was best to prepare. He mentioned he might have been direct and ineloquent. He apologized if he had seemed distant. He set these words down in a letter he was writing. Right after finishing the letter, he asked Evan to deliver it to Lady Zenone through the guild. The protagonist wished he knew what Ledan and Seolang were doing. Even in Yutia's letters, written after arriving at their destinations, their exact whereabouts remained uncertain. He wondered if Seolang had accidentally perished. If she discovered the gift by following his letter, she would reach the pinnacle of a warrior and could attain the Babaya level. She might even gain a gauntlet that increased critical success chance by 20%. If the pride item had been obtained, she wouldn't have remained in inverted inertia. She would have become the strongest. He insisted that was definitely written in the item's description. He added that they had also revealed hidden resources for potential funds, just as a precaution. He believed she likely had talent, so she would have enough to prosper. That place was a land where warriors could claim the world through determination alone. In the desert nation colony, Seolang was celebrating, announcing that the tests were finally over, and thanking the Great Moon for its gift. She used to think the essence of the Golden Mane tribe was just a legend, but what she had heard as a child was no myth or fairy tale. The essence of the Golden Mane tribe was a legendary artifact handed down for hundreds of years, granting power and authority. When she was in the cave, she had spotted the gauntlet and declared she had obtained the essence, having overcome all trials and tests within her inner world. It was all real. What was clear was that the Great Moon had saved her during complex experiments and granted her the power to face the black dragon that had defeated her parents. Therefore, she had to return the favor. Her true intention was not merely to become just another gladiator. It was to become the strongest gladiator, reunite the scattered Golden Mane tribe, and revive them. Then, she would overcome the black dragon. She declared that it was all for him. Speaking as she gazed up at the blue moon, she announced that the great beastmen and beast king rulers of the Golden Mane tribe would be reborn under the blue moon after 500 years. The protagonist stood holding papers, lost in thought. His knight mentioned hearing a rumor from the Information Guild. Curious, the protagonist wondered what it was about. The knight said Seolang was apparently so active in the colony that she'd earned the nickname Golden Flash. The protagonist said he was happy to know she was doing well. His knight agreed, noting it was a very tough place where people would do anything if hungry. Still curious, the protagonist asked about Ladan, mentioning he hadn't heard anything since Ladan said he'd learned the ropes in Lacrissa. Answering the question, Evan said he had some information, but they were verifying its reliability and truthfulness. The protagonist acknowledged this and asked if Evan was busy. Evan remarked that the protagonist was suddenly staring at him intently. The protagonist said it was best to prepare in advance. It would take about a month just to reach the Mana Tower. He stood up in alarm, wondering what the Mana Tower was and saying he'd never heard of it. Alon put his hand to his chin and asked if he shouldn't give it to him. Sighing, his knight said he was used to these last-minute situations. The Green Mana Tower would only take about a week. He told them to head to the Blue Mana Tower instead. It was near Labyrinth City, so it wasn't far. Lying on the couch, the protagonist complained about traveling by carriage, saying it already tired him out. But there was no choice, since the item would help the precious little one. He said Labyrinth City brought back memories. He had spent a lot of time playing there. The labyrinth in the city center was a representative leveling map in Psychedelia. The deeper you went, the better the items. Many players entered the labyrinth, but no one ever reached the end. Just like in the game, the infinite labyrinth kept revealing even irrelevant facts, making certified magic appraisers highly sought after and rich. Rhine was about to take the appraiser exam. With her talent, she would pass easily. Lying down with hands behind his head, the protagonist wondered if Rhine's gift was a bit small. It was just an item to aid in equipment appraisal. He said if that wasn't enough, he would provide extra support. Labyrinth City, Lartam, was a lawless town teeming with explorers and mercenaries. Passing numerous shops on the 5th floor was a secret appraisal shop called Murta, a name discreetly known for its exclusive services. Most clients were nobles and Class A explorers. The Lord of Gilar was also there among them. Rhine held a device and said it generated fire with mana. After the man gave her the relic to appraise, she said it was a relic that could be engraved. Even without mana supplied, it would keep flames lit for an hour. The man said the efficiency had improved drastically. He called it excellent. He said he was in her debt. She saw a type of staff and said it could also be engraved. The reason this shop was famous was the engraving. It was a gift from the Great Moon. It was a kind of jewel with an eye inside, surrounded by immense power. Looking at the artifact, she wondered to herself, appraising it. She said she hadn't understood at first. The person's identity was a close friend of Palahan, a figure from a forgotten era of foreign news. She understood everything was to deal with the blacks, but that order made no sense. Before walking through the city, she kept wondering what an appraiser had to do with the assassin of the blacks. But after seeing the gift, she understood. It was the observer's eye, which quickly identified items below a certain mana threshold to aid in appraisal. Upon looking at it, she said it was totally different from what was known. It was surrounded by many red chains, probably magic. She went over and touched her gift. Just like that, the chains broke. Its true nature wasn't even in the library. The seals were lifted, and the engraving unlocked. With the artifact in hand, she wondered if she needed to awaken it to fight against the blacks. It was both in power and the means of offering sacrifices. To fully awaken it, 252 offerings remained. To increase the relic's attributes, she observed something fundamentally altering the eyes. It only reacted to certain high-level relics. Accumulated in other ways, the power vanished. Identifying all relics and selecting high-level offerings for engraving was something only she in the Eternal Library could do. Everything was to defeat the Black Globe, follow the will of the Great Light. 3 weeks later, at the Blue Mana Tower. Arriving at the tower, they met the Deputy Master of the Blue Mana Tower, a 6th-rank mage named Krace Sim. Seeing them, she asked what they wanted there and told them to speak quickly and leave. She said she was busy and told them to hurry up. Looking at her, he noted she was a familiar face from the game's main story. In the game, he said she reached 8th place in her early 20s, becoming an unprecedented genius and the Tower Master. The Mana Tower was like a noble title, monopolizing essential items in addition to combat power. A Deputy Master transcending humans must have authority that pierces the heavens. The protagonist introduced himself and said that, as the message stated, he had come regarding the Simon matter. At this news, she became desperate and started packing things up, wondering what to do now. The Simon Gate was a rift connecting to unknown subspaces created by excessive magic. It caused abnormal phenomena and great damage. Observing the protagonist with a kind of power that could see stats, she asked what someone could do with only that talent. Waving her hand, she told him to go. He told her to wait and answer. She asked if he wanted to erase Gate 51 and take the treasure. She said it was absolutely possible. She was joking, but then she slapped the table in anger and shouted, asking if he thought only a few people came after that. Not wanting to listen to what she was saying, he stated it was true and told her to just guide him to the Simon Gate and she would see immediately. In his head, he wondered why people didn't trust him. She said that as the unworthy perish and the suffering become counts, she understood the need for a stunt to sway public opinion, but he couldn't make a mockery of the law. She practically threw them out, exhaling immense power. Seeing all that, he thought to himself that perhaps because he'd stayed quiet, these rumors must be spreading. She seemed like a workaholic, yet surprisingly well-informed about outside news. Seeing her, they were terrified. His knight whispered in the protagonist's ear about such power coming just from a human, saying that if they rebelled, they would likely be completely dominated. But the protagonist was also desperate and pushed forward again. He stated that if he couldn't erase the Simon Gate, he would hand over all his property to her. She said he was just talking nonsense. The protagonist grew confident now and said he would even insist vehemently if necessary. He called them reasonable terms for a brief use of her time. She thought about it and said, okay. The deal stood. She stated that, as promised, the moment he failed, all the Count's property would be hers. With hands on the gate, the protagonist said that wouldn't happen. She said she wondered if he was the Count's secret mentor or a lucky guy who became a Count by chance, and, judging by his ignorance, she said it was probably the latter. Despite the inhuman aura, a small mana haul and mid-level talent in the second rank, what he could do with that was pathetic. Originally, there was no need to close the gate simultaneously. It disappeared naturally after 3 months, so research was stopped, and no mage had ever closed a Simon Gate. But the Blue Mana Tower's Simon Gate had caused problems for over 2 years. The protagonist entered the gate area, looked at the crater, and observed. Krasine told him that if he couldn't do anything, he should just leave. She watched him use his hands as a medium instead of a staff. She noted that even ancient spellbooks called this primitive and considered it legendary. While he was preparing, she told him to stop imitating strange things and get out of there. When he started making gestures with his hands, she felt her body stop moving. But she realized it wasn't just her that stopped. Everything had stopped. She called it an absurd power. She spoke, astounded, seeing him emanate immense power. The crisis. It stopped moving. Nothing around it is moving either. She activates her observer eyes to see what's happening. It was unknown. It penetrated deeply. That thing should never be allowed. Like a chalice destined for destruction. Absolute silence. After watching all that, seeing the extraordinary power the protagonist held right then, she says she understands the danger. Now she knows why he wanted to enter that gate. Once he finished, the protagonist announced that the seal was closed. She was shocked by how fast it happened. He claims it's nothing special for him. He just uses specific items and methods. Then, he says he's taking the relic the seal released. He mentions using some persuasive magic since he'll need it again. He wonders if she bought that excuse. Sweating nervously after witnessing something amazing, she says it's all right. Inside his head, the protagonist questions if her expression matches her answer. Did his bluff fail? The protagonist says that if so, he's grateful, but there's really no need. Stepping back and shouting in fear, she promises absolute silence. She won't tell anyone. Still terrified, she insists that she can keep secrets, even if it doesn't seem like it. She swore it. He wonders why she's suddenly acting like this. After exiting the gate, he tells his knight they are heading back. Before he leaves, she tells him to wait and gives him a handmade mana recovery potion. She opens a box packed with them and tells him to take one. As he takes it, he asks if it's top tier. Enthusiastic, she asks if he likes it. She reveals that 2 bottles cost as much as 2 houses. He nearly falls over. She says it's because of the combo he requested. She promises she'll stay silent and that it's absolutely worth it. Screaming, she asks if he's lost his mind. She confirms it's a mana oath. She wonders if she should really perform a mana oath. The protagonist wonders why she'd swear an oath over something so trivial. He thinks there's a misunderstanding. Without waiting for his reply, she begins the mana oath ritual. She states that she keeps her promises. And so, at the Blue Mage Tower, with the oath sworn, he secured the relic. He also got 5 potions and the artifact he desired so much. The knight eyes the artifact and asks if that's the treasure from the seal. It looks rustier than he expected for something so hard to get. He asks if its performance is good. The protagonist, now wearing the artifact on his wrist, doesn't know exactly how it works, but either way, it's something he absolutely needs. The Mark of the Corrupt. He mentions he's glad he secured it safely. The gem embedded in the bracelet absorbs ambient mana and stores it for later use. After adjusting it on his arm, it activates. He notes that it's working well. The storage capacity isn't massive, but it's more than enough compared to his very small mana core. He says his goal isn't combat, but magical research and self-preservation. He wonders what kind of misunderstanding Fania is under. Her sudden kindness is strange. As he heads to his carriage, the protagonist says, "Just to be clear, I am a level 2 mage." Giving a thumbs up, She says she knows he looks exactly like a level 2 mage. She says it with a terrified face. Inside his carriage, he reflects that her reaction was similar to Kalia's the last time he unleashed such strong power. He calls it unsettling. Anyway, he won't be seeing them much. He says he doesn't care. At Duke Altia's house, Loria greets someone, saying it's been a while. She tells them to feel comfortable during their stay. She is speaking to Lady Zenonia. Zenonia says of course, noting that Loria hasn't changed a bit. Above all, it's good to see her again. Loria says that between them, there's no need to weigh ranks or power. That's why it's comfortable. Kalia remarks that Count Palatio's discernment impresses her once again. She admits that following his words that day, she quickly missed the hidden meaning. As they talked, they realized they were both speaking about Palat. An alliance was formed under Count Palat's command, regardless of the reason. With absolute top status, sitting above everyone else, power struggles meant nothing. So Zenonia and Altia grew closer. Loria asks about next month's conference. Is that the reason she came today? She replies that, using her visit as an excuse, the Count sent a letter. It concerned matters regarding the noble houses. Kalia says it looks like a standard apology letter, but there must be a hidden order concealed within it. She says it would be good to figure that out. She notes there aren't any nobles he gets along with. Baron Kenya belongs to the noble faction, and Marquis Valentine is a key figure in the royalist faction. Viscount Belanda is also a royalist. Duke Paldion is major figure in the noble faction. As for the nobles he spoke with at the ball, he dislikes both factions. She wonders if they are going to neutralize them all. Loria says they must reach a conclusion based on common sense. Again, they all agree. Again, he intends to expel the existing nobles and form a new kingdom. They say they are ready for it. Looking up again, Loria realizes that's why he made them duchesses. He needs Altia's prestige. Kalia says her thinking seems correct. She suggests they discuss the plan. Meanwhile, at the Blue Mana Tower, the Tower Master wonders if the Count closed the seal. Studying how he did it, hunched over books, Krasine confirms it. He asks her to explain in detail. The puzzle pieces came together on their own, moving and locking into place. The protagonist, while eating, seems to choke, but claims the food is very good. He says he wants to go home soon. He mentions it must be time for Utia's letter to arrive. Arriving at the Blue Tower, Master Micardo opened the door and spoke up. He wondered if the little gate had disappeared, since he hadn't sensed its presence again. Seeing the master arrive, Krasine said she finished the work he entrusted to her. She was lying on top of books with a tired face. The master wondered if the sun rose in the west, because she wasn't getting angry. He asked why she was ignoring him like that. She became the vice master of the tower at a young age. Because of her blessed talent, her arrogance and pride pierced the sky. However, she took magic very seriously, so she had no intention of fixing her personality. Once she reached the 7th level, she would realize that everything she achieved so far was meaningless, and she would naturally become humble. Therefore, he said he found the current situation very strange. A little suspicious, he tried to get close to her, making small talk. He said the trip to the north was long. He asked if the work was very difficult. He wanted to know how Count Simon sealed the Simon Gate. He wondered if she couldn't say how he installed it because of an oath. With her head down, she said there wasn't much to say in detail. That was all she could speak about. He wondered if it was origin magic. He became very interested in the Count of Palata, 1 month after returning from the Blue Mage Tower. After obtaining the guide of the corrupt and encouraging the investigation of incantations, the number of times he could use magic per day increased. He spent hours learning new incantations and writing them down in his notebook. His knight said his magic was getting stronger. The more he watched the Count practicing this mysterious magic, he also said it didn't seem like second-level magic. It seemed like he was on a different level from some others. Looking at a huge hole, the protagonist said it was impossible for the ground to be excavated like that, just like gravity. Second-level gravity magic isn't strong enough to cause such destruction, even at maximum power, because he thought his magic was second class. Somehow, he felt he was getting stronger. If the power increased enough to be noticeable, it wouldn't be due to proficiency or the incantation. An increase in magic proficiency is an increase in precision and accomplishment, and incantations are closer to activation words that change properties. He mixed up the gravity incantation arrangement for a few months and recently used almost the same incantations alternatively. In the end, the power increased only slightly while adjusting the ideal arrangement. The protagonist says there is no reason for the power to repeatedly become stronger, and he says he thinks his health condition has been good lately. With the letter in hand, the knight said that Utia sent it, and that's why he went there to deliver it to the protagonist to read. Alon thanked him and said he would go in and read it calmly, for he had already used the 3 uses of magic he had that day. Madonna wonders, a reward for a curse. It is cast upon oneself or others through a complex Eastern ritual, and if someone is cursed, They might obtain a reward in exchange for a specific loss. There is no one related to the East around him, so that's not it. He also says he might be receiving faith, Holy Kingdom, the capital, Novali, a purely white city that worships Sharonia, the goddess of the moon and peace. In the East prayer house, Utia was praying. A knight arrived behind her, greeting her, and in his thoughts, it says she is a nun of lower rank than a paladin who doesn't even wear a sacred sash. However, he shows respect voluntarily. He goes and bows to her. He replies yes, this time too, in a small village in the East-West. He saved 8 children and 25 lives, all thanks to her. Utia says that can't be. He was the one who did the good deed. He says she gave him teachings that it is nothing. He speaks that he has always been grateful. For 20 years, unable to even feel divine power, he cannot forget that day when he was about to give up in despair. On that day, he was sitting, believing in nothing and desperate. Utia arrives and says there is something he desperately desires. She tells him to believe in the moon. He questions praying to the moon. She says he will know if he believes, and his head kept wondering, if you are desperate, what can't you do? And according to Utia's words, he prayed to the moon for a few days. Miraculously, he became able to exercise divine power. He is very happy, but yielding to a momentary temptation. Worshipping the moon instead of the goddess Sharonia, he wonders if it isn't entering the path of heresy, for it was in her church that he was devout. However, all power used by borrowing the power of a god was the same, and ritual tools permitted in the name of the god also shone brightly in his hands, leaving him stronger during the course of prayers, proving the divine power. He asks why she told him to believe in the moon. She says that faith comes from invisible belief, but it takes a long time. It is easier to obtain something from something that actually exists, the moon, which is always by your side. He asks why the goddess is also the moon, and that for a year full of doubts, it is a way to believe at least a little more certainly since he got his requests. He bows to the sister and thanks her sincerely. She replies that if he wants to express his gratitude, she asks if he will pray with her. With his hand on his chest and happy, he speaks that naturally he will do the same this time too. Utia says that, by coincidence, it is prayer time. So many people are gathered. They entered a prayer hall and there were various devotees. Facing everyone in the prayer hall, Utia tells everyone to start praying to the moon. Utia became a nun of the Rosary of the Holy Kingdom.